Welcome, folks. We will be starting in a couple of minutes. We're just having some technical difficulties when it comes to captioning, and we want to make sure that this is as accessible an event as possible. In the meantime, we're really happy that you're here already. So please feel free to let us know where you're calling in from in the chat. We'd love to know what organization, what traditional territory, what location that you're joining us from, because we love to know who's in the audience. So I hope you have a great experience today, and we will be starting in a few minutes. Welcome, everybody who's joined us already. You may be hearing this a few times, but as more people join us, it's important to say. So we will be starting in a few minutes. We're just starting a little bit late so that we have captioning for everyone. And I think that's a really important piece. So we will be starting shortly. In the meantime, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to know who's in the audience today, because we think this is an important discussion, and it's always interesting to know who's joining us. So we're really grateful that you've joined us already, and we will be starting shortly once the captioning is ready. Welcome, everybody. We will be starting in a minute. We're just trying to get everything going when it comes to the technology, the joys of technology that can happen. So we're just making sure that captioning is working. So I think it's just been enabled. We're doing a test. And trying the test right now for the all right, the captioning seems to be working.
Yep, we're all good.
Great. Awesome. We'll get going then. So welcome, everyone. Really excited that you're with us today. You will notice that at the bottom of your screen, you can get access to the closed captioning and subtitles. Here's some of the information about how to do that. Whether you require it entirely or you just find it helpful, please make use of it. We want to make this as accessible an event as possible. And if there's anything else that we can do to make our future events more accessible to you, please let us know. So I'm Jade Pichette. I'm the Manager of Programs at Credit Work Canada. And I'm very excited to be with you today. I use the pronouns they and them. And this panel is being done in Zoom webinar mode. So the recording will be made available to all attendees, and we are recording the event. But that also means that participants' cameras and microphones are automatically switched off. However, you can engage with us through the chat. Many people have been saying where they're calling in from, their organizations, their locations, their traditional territories. So really happy to see that. And so please feel free to engage in the chat, and also feel free to use the Q&A for later in the discussion. We won't be able to get to every question that gets asked, but we'll certainly try and get to as many as we can, and really kind of keep this conversation about mentorship open. So you also, as a note, just check when you are using the chat that you're putting it either to the hosts and panelists if you need to direct it to us, or to everyone if you're trying to direct it to the audience as a whole. So most of you probably know who we are already, but Credit Work Canada, through dialogue, education, and thought leadership, we empower employers to build workplaces that celebrate all employees, regardless of gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation. We help create safer, more inclusive workplaces that realize the full potential of all employees and bring down barriers to employment. Our learning, networking, community events happen across the country, and I'm very excited to say that we'll actually be soon providing information about some in-person events that we're doing over Pride season. And we just had our first in-person event since the pandemic in Montreal last month, which is very exciting. But of course, we're still going to be a virtual first workplace and have many more virtual content for you to access. We also have had a really exciting year with a growing network. So we now have over 225 proud partners and 60 proud partners or community partners. We also like to recognize that Credit Work Canada works on the unceded and treaty traditional territories of the First Nations, Mentee, and Inuit, which includes Two-Spirit and LGBTQIA+ Indigenous communities. Our main office, which is where I'm located right now, is based in Takaranto or Toronto, which is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties signed with multiple Mississauga and Chippewa bands. These lands and waters are the traditional homes and territories of and cared for by the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And today, Toronto is home to Indigenous, Afro-Indigenous, and Urban Indigenous folks from across Turtle Island. And so if you're not familiar with what traditional territory you're on, although it looks like folks in the audience are pretty aware, which is great, feel free to start with native-land.ca, but just use that as a starting place to start your research and learn more about your local community. As somebody who gets to live, work, and play in this territory as an uninvited visitor, I am still a treaty person and bound by treaties as a white settler, and I'm very grateful for living on this territory, working on this territory, and playing on this territory. But I know that the history that brought me here is complicated, and there's a lot of work we need to do. So today's discussion is focused on volunteer mentorship as work, as all of you know, and we really want to make sure that we cultivate a welcoming and inclusive virtual space. So we know it's been a challenging time for many people. Tensions have been high, feelings have been high. We also know we have a great audience and we have great folks who come to our events. So please, think of, is this going to be something that is inclusive? Is this going to be something that we're going to be able to engage with in a positive way, and make sure that you're engaging with respect, care, and compassion in the chat. Also, please, as mentioned, use the Q&A function. We will be doing some questions, but we'll only be able to do questions that are directly related to the subject matter being explored today, which is volunteer mentorship in the workplace. So if you have other questions that may come up, feel free to email us at info@prideatwork.ca after the session, and we're more than happy to provide that support. Just as a note, though, we are going into Pride season, so we are working out a bit of a higher capacity than at other times of the year. So please just be patient with us as we move forward. So we'll be going into the panel and doing some audience Q&A, and that will be the main focus today, but we'll also provide some resources for you to get involved with mentorship, to find a mentor, to find a mentee, and what that looks like in Canada currently. So you don't need to know more about me necessarily, but I wanted to take this moment to talk about the importance of mentorship. So mentorship, and one of the reasons why I thought this was such an important panel for us to do, is one of the change makers when it comes to employment. We know the impact that it can have and how much networks are a lifeblood of employment. If you have networks, you are going to do well in the working world. And we know those networks and who you have networks can be highly impacted based on your social location, so your race, your sexual orientation, your gender identity, your class, and who did you grow up with, who did you have in your personal networks, and how did that translate into your work life? And so we know that in Canada, there is a disparity for 2S LGBTQIA folks. The SRDC research that we've been collaborating on, the economic, health, and social inequities faced by LGBTQ2S plus individuals in Canada, showcased how within sexual orientation, heterosexual men were found to earn the most, around 56,000, followed by gay men who were making about 51,000 a year, lesbian women who were making about 45, bisexual men who are making around 31. So bisexual men in Canada make less than lesbians do. And bisexual women make 25,000 on average in Canada. We've also seen from the Trans Plus Canada research that 50% of trans people in Canada make less than 30,000 a year. And all of these are directly related and connected to whether people have supports along the way. So we know that 2S LGBTQIA folks are more likely to be homeless, should be more likely to have challenges in their early career. And this is something that ends up translating into our working lives. Although we bring our professional experiences to this discussion, and that's where our focus is, every single person that's talking today has personal experiences in regards to how we've been treated in community, how we've been treated in certain workplaces because of being members of the community, because of experiencing sexism, racism, and more. And we see how this translates from an early career into a later career. So it was found that if we go back to students, a study that was based in the States found that LGB students were 2.5 times more likely to graduate if they had a mentor. We've also seen by a study done by the Trevor Project that LGBTQ youth who have a accepting and supportive adult are 40% less likely to report a suicide attempt. And we also see this when it comes to research in regards to trans folks in Canada. GAL has done some research in regards to students, and this evidence keeps building up over time about that need of that supportive adult, that need of that supportive mentor who's able to help guide and shape that person's next experience. I know for myself, I was a trans youth who didn't have a mentor, who didn't have that support, who didn't feel like I had eldership in my life. And that has since changed many ways, but that impacted my early career, right? In terms of how far I was able to go. That has changed as I've gone forward because of the relationships and networks that I've gotten to build and connect over time, and how certain folks I've worked with in mentorship and had as my mentors, whether that was a short relationship, sometimes that was even just meeting once, but that moment or those ongoing moments in other cases have been such an important part of my career. Now that I'm in a place where I'm supervising others, I also have seen the need of how I need a mentee, and the power of being a mentor myself on the other side of things. I have learned quite a lot by doing that work, by being able to make that connection, and support somebody else that was growing up in their career. In a discussion that happened at the Moving Trans History Forward conference, Ms. Major Griffin Gracie and Marcus Cyrus Ware talked about the importance of those of us who especially were white trans folks, and how we are developing mentorship for trans people of color in our lives. How are we developing and bringing people up? And how are we looking to make space also so that people can move up? So I'm very excited for the discussion today. There's going to be really, really amazing speakers, and really looking at many different places of mentorship and how mentorship should look like. So it's important that regardless of whether you're looking to be a mentee to others, or a mentor, that relationship is one that you both learn from, that you both connect from, and you both grow from. So I'm so excited today to introduce our moderator, Tracy Guerrer, who is the Interim Executive Director of Mentor Canada. She has an MA in Counseling Psychology, and is a certified Canadian counselor. She's held executive leadership roles in the social impact and charitable sectors, and has been a consultant to mentoring programs and organizations across Canada. Along with her team at Mentor Canada, Tracy is broadening and deepening access to quality mentoring for children and youth, raising the profile of mentoring, and building sector capacity through research, network building, and knowledge exchange. Tracy, I'm so glad that you're joining us today and that we're getting to have this conversation. So welcome.
Thanks so much, Jade. Thank you for that incredible introduction. At Mentor Canada, we live, breathe, and work mentorship and really wanting to foster opportunities for Canadians. And so your comments and your insight around giving space for safe mentoring relationships is just so core to our work. And that it really is about those opportunities to formally engage in a mentoring program or informally connect. And I think that is just so incredible. So I am truly honored to moderate this panel today. We have got a dynamic panel for you. And so I want to introduce them at this point in time. And so we're going to walk through and I'll do some introductions. It's really going to be a dynamic conversation. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Colin. Colin is the Executive Director of Pride at Work. And Colin has a vast experience and reach across multiple sectors across Canada. He is currently the Executive Director, right, at Pride at Work. He is part of the Board of Directors at Volunteer Toronto, which is one of the largest volunteer centers in Canada. And he's involved in that important work for the voluntary sector, and not only supporting expansion, but really looking at how we can innovate and engage more Canadians and certainly Torontonians into mentoring. He sits as an advisory board member for the Diversity Institute at the Ted Rogers School of Management, now at the Toronto Metropolitan University as of yesterday, which is great, exciting news as well. And he's a diverse city fellow that was nominated for that through Civic Action, which does such incredible work as well. One of the things, though, that I think is so great about Colin and that he has shared with us is that he's also a mentor at a formal program at Jumpstart that engages refugee Canadians as well. So I think that that is a really important component, because we've got experienced mentors, we've got individuals that are running mentoring programs, we've got individuals on our panel that are really enhancing the work around DEI and looking at how to expand opportunities for Canadians, and certainly for the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. Next, we have Tyler Boyce, who is the new executive director at the Enchanté network, which is really exciting. He is Kenyan and Somalian Black queer public policy professional and a community organizer. I've had the privilege to engage in a few conversations with Tyler, and that is just so exciting around the work that is being done around Enchanté's national mentorship program that really is connecting individuals from member organizations with experienced mentors in order to encourage mentorship relationships. And it's about that connecting, that convening, and providing those opportunities through formal mentoring programs and those networking opportunities that's so very, very important. He's the new executive director, so some really great insight and vision for the future for that network as well. Next on our panel is Joelle. Joelle Rodrigues is the senior manager of HR business partner at Scotiabank. So we've got a really great corporate partner here at the table as well, talking, and we'll share around their HR experience, the HR resources in the field, and certainly how those apply around a mentoring lens, and how this can evolve to really start to take a look at corporate structures and the engagement of using a mentoring mindset within those settings. So they sit on a variety of volunteer boards and committees as well. So very, very exciting to have you, Joelle, here with your experience and your expertise. And last, but certainly not least, we have Gabriela. We will also known as Gabby Jordao, which is really exciting. Gabby has a host of experience in the DEI realm and in the field. So important for us to hear about her experience and the work that she's doing to advance inclusion, and really looking at from a corporate structure around engagement, leading many roles and regional and international and global professionals to have discussion. And certainly looking forward to how you've implemented those strategies and how individuals can really take a look at mentorship as a core piece to that work as well. So without further ado, this is our panel. You're in for a real treat. I'm really excited to jump in and to really start our discussion. I think that what I really want to start with today with our panelists is, can you share with us how you individually would define mentorship? Because we know there is a whole host of ways that mentoring is being defined today to capture the impact and the connection of individuals through a mentoring lens, and then how it's affected you in your mindset. So Colin, I'm going to hand it to you because you're the executive director, you're hosting this event, and you're first on my screen. So I'm going to hand it to you first.
Thanks, Tracy. And thank you very much for lending your skills and experience to moderate this conversation. I can't think of a better person to take care of us today. So I really, really appreciate you being here, and all of my fellow panelists, all of whom I know pretty well. So this will be a fun chat for a while. But to answer your question, I don't want to give a prescriptive definition of mentorship, excuse me, by any means. Maybe I'll just talk about it, as you suggested, kind of in the context of kind of how I approach mentorship. And the way that I've always approached either kind of working with a mentor or finding somebody to work with as a mentor has really been focused on helping people navigate new spaces. So you mentioned that, I volunteer with Jumpstart Refugee Talent, which is an outstanding organization that's led by refugees in Canada. And I really love their model of matching folks by industry and really helping people who have recently arrived in Canada navigate that industry and its nuances within the Canadian labor market, because we do know that industries might be the same across the globe, but the specifics of how we move through them can differ. So I always find great mentorship relationships help navigate those spaces. But really, you know, throughout my career, I've always relied on mentors to help me see certain potential in myself that maybe I didn't realize was there. I really enjoyed Jade's comments at the start. They mentioned, you know, not really having a mentor, not having a ton of folks to look up to who shared their identity at a young age. And, you know, I had a very similar experience where I didn't grow up with a lot of queer people in my life as models for what I could be. So my mentors have always really helped me see around corners and remind me that just because you haven't seen somebody like you in a particular position doesn't mean that there's not a place for you there. So, you know, I think about people like Alison Bain, who's the executive director of Heritage Toronto. She was one of my first mentors when I worked at the Toronto International Film Festival years ago. And I don't think she ever really realized until very recently when I told her what an impact she had on my life. You know, letting me see that I had the potential to manage other people, which wasn't something that I ever saw for myself when I first started working there. So really helping people see that potential, navigate new spaces. That's really my approach to mentorship, or how I would define it in the context of the work that I do.
Thanks, Colin. So important, that potential piece. And sometimes we don't see those skills or qualities in ourselves, but others are seeing them, and to encourage us, and for individuals to maybe take that step forward, right? And to nudge, right? Gently nudge, but sometimes forcefully nudge to say, you need to do this, right? What do you need in order for you to take that courage and that step forward? And how can I support, right, along the way? And it's that shared journey that I think is so impactful, that it's not about a hierarchy. Tyler, I'm going to hand it to you. Answer the same question, share your experience and how you define mentoring.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. And yeah, I think I'm just thinking about some of the things that Colin just mentioned and how they resonate with me. One of those things being, you know, not wanting to give a prescriptive definition of mentorship. I think that for me, mentorship, I really think about it like a space. Mentorship is just a space to be vulnerable. And I think from that flexible sort of definition, it can feel different for different people. We all need different conditions to feel comfortable actually expressing our fears or our weaknesses or our aspirations. And I think that a good mentor creates that space for their mentee. I think there's a lot of power in that space. And at the Enchanté network, as Canada's largest network of queer and trans frontline organizations, we're a network of nearly 200 independent organizations. And I think that when we work through our national mentorship program, we connect queer and trans mentors with queer and trans mentees. And that's really what we try to stress to our mentors and to our mentees, that this isn't a space to put on a mask or a certain persona. It's really a space to acknowledge that we're all just people on a journey of learning at different levels of that journey and wanting to share what we've learned. So again, just bringing us always back to that space of vulnerability. I think the second part of your question was really around what it means to me personally. So being a mentor myself, I think that mentorship has this new meaning of incredible fulfillment. Just being ready to answer those questions, to create those spaces where folks are able to ask the questions that maybe they're embarrassed to ask, and also having an outlet to sort of share some of my skills in a really in a contained kind of results-based framework is something that's really, really powerful for me. But it's also the layer of being a young Black queer leader. I think that mentorship in my life has, like Colin mentioned with his mentorship experience, really can change the trajectory of your personal and your professional life. I think a lot of, I don't have to explain this to, I think a lot of like marginalized groups, like for the Black folks, the Indigenous folks, the women, the disabled folks on this call. I think we all understand that there's a lot of deficiency models that can be put on our communities. And especially when we're at the intersection of queerness or transness. So the way that intersects with mentorship is that we're not usually the folks who are getting tapped on the shoulder. We're not usually the folks, the communities that folks are thinking that there's talent there because of white supremacy, because of colonialism, because of patriarchy. So being able to kind of reflect on mentorship in my life, those opportunities of mentorship were always 100% of the time granted to me from Black queer women. So Black queer women being the ones to recognize talent in places that don't look like white cis men all the time, but places that look where innovation comes from, which is always going to be at the margins in my opinion. So being able to really just take this opportunity to really say thank you to the Black queer women in my life who have taken me on as a mentee and taught me what it means to be a mentor. And I guess my final remarks on the question are really just around like what a mentor actually does, or what I try to do as a mentor, which is not to prescribe or give advice. But sometimes it looks like that, and sometimes it looks like templates. But other times it just looks like bringing folks towards that moment of like, okay, I could see myself doing that, or something about what you said resonated with me in the way that Colin's remarks just resonated with me earlier. Those are the aspects of mentorship that have really brought me, I suppose, to this panel discussion, and which really ground me as I lead the Enchanté network. Yeah, so I really appreciate the question, Tracy.
Thanks, Tyler. You shared so much. There is a tremendous amount to unpack, and we're going to get to that in a few minutes as well. I want to get to the rest of our panel, but one thing that I thought was just so important about what you spoke about and what Colin also spoke about is creating that safe space. And that's just so very, very important in a mentoring relationship. And for mentors to have that awareness around their actions, their words, their behaviors, the way they're engaging, that is either creating a safe space or prohibiting it. And I think that is just such an important dance for both mentor and mentee, is to have that shared safe space. So thank you. Joelle, I'm going to come to you next. Same question. How would you define mentorship, and how has it affected your life?
So in terms of defining mentorship, there's nothing I can add to Tyler or Colin's excellent answers, but I'll focus on how it's affected my life, and especially from a corporate lens. So being a queer person of color, new to the scene in 2006, it was hard to find mentors. And so looking for mentors for queer people is challenging from my perspective, and finding mentors that align with your values. And I'll speak a little bit about that later. But one of the things that I think is really important is to know that mentees have a very strong power in what they do, because they also teach the mentors about other experiences. And so one of the things I try to do is give other folks of color, women, opportunities to be mentored by me, so I can also learn from them as much as they're learning from me. And I think that's something that is underappreciated by mentors, because it is the relationship of power and privilege sometimes goes one way. And I think it's something that we have to be cognizant of, that we can learn from our mentees. So that has been my greatest learning in mentoring other folks, as well as in the corporate world, using my privilege to set up mentorship programs. A number of us have that privilege that we underestimate to instigate change, to make networks that other people may not have. And so I would throw the gauntlet down to the folks on this panel to think about using your privilege to help someone else, because they may not have those connections.
Thank you, Joel. Very powerful, right? There's that piece around privilege and opening doors and using that to the advantage of others, right? Those that are and the new generations and those that are in our environments that maybe don't have the courage, don't have the confidence, don't identify those skills in themselves to be able to leverage that forward. So I completely agree. In the mentoring space, we talk all the time about mentoring and those mentoring relationships that are most impactful, balance, teaching and learning, both from mentor and mentee. And so many times we hear from mentors that they hope that their mentee is getting as much out of this as they are. And that's the richness of learning and teaching together in that balanced walk together. So thank you for sharing that. Gabby, I'm going to come to you. And I'd love for you to share how you define mentorship and your own experiences and how that's affected your life or impacted you personally.
Thank you, Tracy. First of all, honored to share the virtual stage with these amazing panelists. Really hard to follow, Colin, Joel, and Tyler, but I will do my best. I loved what has been said about elevating other voices, especially the voices that are not as privileged as mine, with the identities that I hold, creating safe spaces, really identifying potential. So thank you for my fellow panelists for that. For me, a mentor comes from a place of curiosity, really listening actively to the mentee so you can meet them where they're at. It's not because I came to Canada almost like 5 years ago and had the exposure that I had and the experiences that I had, that if I'm mentoring someone who shares some of my lived experiences, that the journey will look the same for them. So whenever I am in the privileged position to work with someone and really learn, I find that as a mentor, I always learn even more than the mentee, is really talking to them, directly to them, to build that relationship. And then in terms of what it means to me is, I always love leveraging my mentors to help challenge me to look at things from a different angle, reframe a problem or a situation, and look at that from a different perspective. In big decisions that I have in my life, say I got a new job and I had to present to the C-suite. I am nervous about that. I would go to a mentor and say, hey, I have this, and then do a dry run of the presentation and get feedback from a mentor. If I'm about to make a big career move, or even for personal decisions in my life, I love leveraging a mentor. At the corporate setting, I actually love picking up a mentor that has a completely different shared experience than I have, because that's when they would see things from a very different angle that I do. So can't really highlight enough the importance of mentors, especially for those who are more marginalized in our communities. And I'll leave to that.
Thank you, Gabby. There are a few things, words that are standing out for me right now. Potential, new perspective, power, and privilege. And so I think that we've touched on some really powerful words that have opportunity in mentoring relationships and that dance between mentor and mentee. Joelle, I'm going to come and ask you right now a direct question around that many people, and you started to talk about this earlier, many people don't know about the roles of a mentor and a mentee, what they are, what they could be. Can you provide us with some context as to what the roles are from your perspective, the influence they can have, and why these two types of roles are so important?
Thank you so much. Let's start with the mentee, because I think in a lot of our dialogue, we focus on the mentor, the importance and the power of a mentor, but mentors do not drive, in my perspective, the mentor-mentee relationship. They are the guidance, they are the soundboard, they are the challenger, sometimes the counselor, but they don't actually drive that relationship forward, especially in a relationship where the mentee is hungry to learn or has the issues. So the mentee, from my perspective, needs to be very cognizant around what is it that they want out of this relationship. Specifically because I myself have three mentors, one for, just bouncing issues that come up at work. One is more around how to network, how to break through some of those barriers. And the other one is around long-term career growth, because each of them brings their own life experience. And so, and in the folks that I mentor, they also, I found, have a very different skills. They both have different skill sets, but also different needs. So the mentor can definitely guide the mentee. And so it's all around guidance. And to Tyler and Colin's earlier point, the greatest role would be holding space and not pushing your own agenda, challenging, questioning with curiosity, but actually understanding what is right for this mentee at that point in time. Whereas the mentee has to do that pre-work, do reflection, come to the table with ideas, with solutions, with questions. Because if you don't, that relationship, like any relationship, can be strained. Because if you're just taking and you're not really enriching that relationship yourself, it may be very one-sided. So from my perspective, both individuals have a role, but definitely the mentee has to be the driver in that seat, because the mentor is always busy. They have other folks that they're mentoring.
Yeah, thank you, Joelle. Gabby just wrote in the chat as well, right? For mentors not to push their own agenda. And that's just so critical, because that space, and I like to look at, and so many of us have had informal mentors, right? Those natural mentors that come into our lives that either we have a connection with, or we want to seek out advice or guidance, or someone who's walked a few steps ahead of us. And as we've spoken about, many times those individuals don't know that we identify them as a mentor. It's an honored title to be called a mentor, I think, and it's an earned title. And so coming in and not having your own agenda, I think is just so important. I want you to answer one more question for me. And so I warned you, I was going to jump on those. So you said you had 3 mentors, right? And so why? What space do they hold that's different? And why is it important potentially to have more than one mentor that play different roles, add to your career, your life in different ways? Share that with me a little bit.
Sure. I would have to say that each mentor brings a different skill set. So one of my mentors is outside of HR, which is my skill set. 2 of them are in HR, but both of them have such different experiences and different approaches. One just asks questions and challenges me more from that coaching side. The other one actually says, have you tried this? Because sometimes I do hit roadblocks and can't move forward. So that's why each relationship adds something different for me. And the one thing I would say that aligns all of them is values. They share values that I hold dear. And why this is important is early in my career, I approached someone that I'd met socially. He was an older white queer gentleman in HR. And I thought, this will be great because, we're both queer. He'll give me a lot of direction. And one of the things early on he said to me was, it's great being a guy in HR because women, they're going to get pregnant. You're just going to move up faster than them. And I was, as a person of color, I couldn't reconcile that in terms of my own values. And so I slowly had to pull out of that mentorship relationship. And so I had to be very cognizant around who I picked as a mentor, because values really drive a lot of the conversations after.
Yeah, that's just so important, right? That alignment of values and feeling safe and respected, right? I think is just so very, very important. So Colin, this conversation about having a shared value set, I want to ask you a question around assumptions in mentoring relationships. And certainly in the 2S LGBTQIA+ community, people and equity deserving people as a whole need a mentor, but sometimes there are assumptions that they need to share identity, which is different than values. Can you care to disrupt that a little bit for us, or comment that what the difference is, but are those assumptions valid? And if they are or not, talk to us about how and why.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the context, right? Because I'm like a hippy dippy, like altruistic person. I want to make the world a better place. So every idea is a good idea to me. I'm like, let's do it. But I've also worked in the nonprofit sector my whole career. And I know that unless we have a really clear mission, it's really easy to not just creep away from that mission, but just be consumed by all of the minute little things that come our way. So I'm a big fan of posing what a lot of folks in nonprofit strategy call question zero, which is always, what exactly are we trying to accomplish? Because if you answer question zero, you should have an immediate answer for every other question that comes your way. So I think anytime you want to set up a relationship as a mentor, or if you're looking for a mentor, what's your question zero? What are you trying to accomplish? Because if you are a person who has an incredible network of people who share your identity, and you get a lot of really great support from those folks, but you're entering into a new industry where you don't have any connections, you just graduated, maybe you're trying to get a foothold in this new sector. If you've got that support from an identity perspective, do you need to find a mentor in that industry who is queer or trans or shares your racial or a racial identity or ethnic identity? Do you need to have that connection? So you have to really form that question zero about what you're trying to accomplish so that you can locate a really good mentor. When I was in the Diversity Fellows program with Civic Action, they were having a really tough time matching me with a mentor because I have worked at Pride Work Canada since 2014. I know a lot of queer and trans leaders. They're already in my network. And we actually identified that as a huge challenge for me, because I actually needed to extend my network beyond the community that we work with at Pride Work Canada for my advocacy to be effective. So they matched me with a mentor who somewhat shares my identity, Chandran Fernando, who's the managing partner of Matrix 360, but he's got a really broad professional network that isn't anything like mine. So that was our question zero was, how do I broaden my network beyond the folks that I'm currently engaging with? So that was a really good exercise for me. I think similarly, I see something play out a lot with some of those queer and trans senior leaders that I work with, where a lot of people come to me looking for a volunteer opportunity or a board appointment. Which Pride organization should I serve with? Do you know of any mentor programs for matching like queer mentors with queer mentees? But what I always try to remind them is that there are a lot of organizations and there's a lot of communities that need support from really outstanding and resilient and really smart, creative queer leaders that may not be from our communities. Hospitals serve queer and trans people. Community centers serve queer and trans people. We need really high performing folks on those boards and working with the staff of those organizations so that we're taking all of our talents and our skills and we're putting them to good work, making things more accessible for members of our community. So do I think that the mentor-mentee relationship always needs to be a direct match in terms of identity? It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And I just would add that sometimes when we are kind of breaking new ground in an industry where we might not see a lot of people who are like us in that industry, if every single person goes to that same queer person at the ad agency or at the investment firm, that person's going to be overloaded and feel as though I can't help all these people. So we have to think about what we're asking of our leaders. Are you overwhelmed with requests for mentorship? So we have to kind of think about all of these dynamics instead of saying, well, I'm a queer, cis guy, so that's who I have to find. No, I have to figure out what I'm trying to accomplish and find somebody who's going to help me with that in the best way possible. And we're both going to get something. I think the great thing we're all saying as part of this panel is that whether you're the mentor or you're being mentored, everybody should get something out of the deal. It shouldn't really be a one-way street. because we all have things to learn from each other. So I hope that answers your question, Tracy.
Yeah, and so much more, Colin. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And so many times we hear from marginalized communities as well that there's an assumption that the mentee wants an individual that shares their identity. And Joelle, going back to your comment that the mentee really needs to drive this and to articulate that question zero, what do they want? But where are their gaps or areas in their social capital network that really needs to be filled? And so those assumptions, I think we really need to displace and to blow up and to really have in-depth value conversations about what the value of the mentoring relationship is, and who needs to benefit right out of the gate from that mentoring relationship versus these assumptions. And so it's conversation, right? It's authenticity. It's creating those safe spaces for those conversations, and to hear sometimes difficult conversations and difficult circumstances for individuals to really nurture and benefit from mentoring. Gabby, I'm going to come to you next, because we started to talk about the role of mentoring, and there's lots of conversation now around sponsorship as well and mentoring. And so can you help us to understand what the difference is, where there's common ground, and help us to advance potentially for the role that both sponsorship and mentorship play for two-spirited queer and trans people?
Great question. I love it, Tracy. And it is a good one because I feel that the concepts are related, but yet so different. And not knowing the difference between mentorship and sponsorship may lead to a mentor thinking that they are supporting someone in all ways possible, when the person's really getting just one form of support. I love a very simple and straightforward definition from Catalyst. I've mentioned part of the definition before. The mentor talks to you and the sponsor talks about you. So really the sponsor is the one who is going to talk about you when you're actually not in the room. They're going to be the advocates for your advancement, really champion your work, especially with people that can elevate your voice and give you access to places that you wouldn't have if it wasn't for them. I really can't highlight enough the importance of both mentors and sponsors for our community, and obviously especially to those in the community that are even further marginalized than certain identities. And that is because we all know that we are still underrepresented at the corporate setting, especially at higher levels. And the gap is certainly bigger for Indigenous, Black, trans and non-binary folks. So the sponsors can really help others understand that folks are worth investment. And if it wasn't for them, that wouldn't be enough. I hope we have allies on the line, and that I'm not just preaching to the choir here, but because if we do, my message for allies is, great, you want to be an ally, we appreciate you, but really step up and don't just educate yourself. Certainly quite important to be in a journey that you're investing, you're learning, but show your commitment by sponsoring us. That's the best way possible, and not even sponsoring me, because again, I do feel that I hold privileges that many people don't. But really just step up and be a sponsor for those in our community that don't have an access to places of privilege that I do have access.
Thanks, Gabby. Yeah, it's so important to the role that sponsorship can play in the lives of marginalized communities, and certainly individuals that may not have a voice at the table. And I think that that is just so important. You know, it's interesting because as we talked about the different dimensions of mentoring, the value that it has, sponsorship has a role in all of this. And sometimes it's an individual mentor that can sponsor and create that elevated voice and to create advocacy and advocate for individuals. But other times mentors don't necessarily have that in their realm either. And so I want to demystify a little bit around the pressure sometimes that a mentor might feel. And sometimes that holds people back from saying, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm ready to be a mentor. Do I have the skill set? Am I connected enough? And I really like the conversation that we've had around multiple mentors playing different roles. People, some mentoring relationships are longer, some are shorter, to demystify that pressure and to alleviate that it's about that shared journey together and being curious, right, about who that mentee is and their lived experience and how you can help to support. So I think that that's really, really interesting. Tyler, I want to hand it to you for one final question for us. And so we've talked lots about different roles, the influence of mentoring, the value of creating safe space, and that mentees really need to drive this. Can you share with us about mentorship with 2S LGBTQ, 2IA, plus communities and how they can form community care and how we can advance that collectively and the role that mentorship plays within it?
That is a big question, but one that we talk about all the time at Enchanté. I think the way that I'll answer it is that, you know, we've seen quite the boom in queer and trans organizations throughout the country. After the historic federal LGBTQ2 Community Capacity Fund, the nearly $15 million of investments, it's really seen organizations be supported to grow, and also brand new organizations come to be in communities where the trans youth looking for gender affirming care literally had nowhere to turn to, where there's queer and trans youth experiencing homelessness who can't access the shelter system in the same way. So having these organizations proliferate throughout the country has really been a moment in time, and a moment that requires pause. And I think it brings us to your question, which is really around what does it mean to develop a community of care? So the way that we do that at the Enchanté Network is primarily through mentorship. We focus on capacity building, and the best way to build capacity is through networking. It's not a timed program that lasts for 6 months and then disappears into some nebulous alternate reality. No, mentorship is a connection. It's a relationship, and it's something that can withstand any sort of funding cycle. So that is the care that groups like new organizations like Quadrangle and St. John's that is starting up their first ever 2S LGBTQ+ community center, where they're able to offer spaces to connect, but also essential frontline services and fill the gaps that broader public institutions continue to perpetuate. When we look at organizations like Two Spirits in Motion, it's a national two-spirit organization that's also part of the Enchanté Network in addition to Quadrangle. Being able to connect these newer organizations with mentorship that exactly answers their question zero, that's what community care looks like. That's what it looks like for us to look beyond Enchanté or beyond Pride at Work or beyond one single organization, and now be able to see, like, what does it mean for us to have a national thriving ecosystem from coast to coast to coast as a way to care for the sector, while at the same time caring for the tens of thousands of queer and trans folks that are in Canada that deserve to have public institutions that meet the needs, that deliver on the conditions that they need to thrive. So that's really how I think about community care. I think about it through the lens of what does it mean to be a network? What does it mean to sustain? And what does it mean to move funders, governments, foundations beyond models of specific programs money, but towards models of capacity building? So operations, being able to use mentorship to tell our story and to make sure that the whole, like the ground zero, the question zero for the Enchanté network is, what are we going to do to make it so that no queer and trans organizations in this country feels like they're alone? And I think we all learned a little bit about what it means to feel alone during the pandemic. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, so important as can we say coming out of the pandemic at this point, I'm hoping that isolation for individuals is just been amplified, and building those connections and those relationships go beyond funding grants. I so appreciate that, because so many times organizations and programs are driven by the parameters of those funding grants, but this is about building communities, and how you do that are through relationships and connections, and meaningful ones that amplify voice, seek out potential, look at sponsorship and opportunities for individuals, which is so really important. So I appreciate the incredible work that you're doing at the network as well, because it really is about bridging those opportunities for individuals. I want to move to some questions because we've got some really great Q&A questions from our attendees that really start to highlight, and I'm going to start with the first question around, where do you have to be in life and in career to be a useful mentor? And that, really is a strong question, because I'd like each of the panelists to comment on, what is that skill set? Where do you have to be? And can we demystify that role a little bit in answering this question? Colin, we haven't heard from you in a while, and I'm going to hand it to you first.
I personally think that if you've accomplished something that somebody else hasn't, you have the potential to mentor that person. But I think a really important caveat in the context of the communities that we're talking about today is that, and something that I've noticed is that the difference between the experience of people between generations in queer and trans communities is pretty vast. Like, things have moved forward very well for our community. Still an enormous amount of work to do. But, for instance, I was entering the workforce when they were introducing employment protections on the grounds of sexual orientation. And then we only really got protections at every jurisdictional level on gender identity and gender expression in the last couple of years. So the experience of the people who were trying to guide me, and Joelle talked about this a little bit, the experiences of people who were trying to guide me, they had achieved whatever level of seniority they achieved because they were able to hide who they were. And they did that out of a sense of safety. I don't want to get fired for being gay. So by the time they were giving me advice, that was a bit stale, right? So I was getting told, just don't talk about it at work. Try not to be too obvious about it. And I mean, good luck with me. But I didn't really want to take that advice. I had been out since I was 14 years old. I wasn't interested in going back in any closets. So I had to find people who were more aware of, what the better advice would be given that generational context. So I think that that's something that is really important to think about in all different kind of respects of when you're going to be a mentor. And a lot of folks here have been talking about, don't go in with any assumptions or, an agenda, because the person you're mentoring probably knows a little bit more about their immediate work environment and their goals than you do. So you have to be aware of how your experience might have been different from the person that you're mentoring, and how you might need to adjust your strategy working with them based on some of those environmental factors like employment protections, what type of industry they're in, who else is in their network, what other kind of parts of their identity you might not share that you need to understand a little bit better before you're able to give good advice. So I hope that answers our audience question a little bit, and I'm eager to hear what other folks think too.
I'm going to open it up to the rest of our panel. Anyone else want to comment on that question? And
I'm happy to comment that I have colleagues who are mentors, and I know for the purposes of this, it's around employment, but mentorship is a larger thing. So, for example, a colleague of mine dealt with eating disorders, and so he mentors folks, and he is quite young as well. But to Colin's point, it is about your lived experience. It is about learning, and it is about finding someone who can ask and challenge you with curiosity and create a safe space. And you may have someone who is a vice president of a multinational corporation, but if they don't create that space for you, regardless of their years of experience, you're not going to get a fulfilling experience. So, and Tyler talked about the Black queer women in his life that have really just leaned in. And so the qualities of curiosity, ownership, wanting to provide guidance, those are the qualities that make someone a mentor. And I think that if you have experience to give, there will always be someone. So it may be not your peer, it may be someone who is, right out of high school. There's lots of experiences that we all have that we can share.
Yeah, Joelle, that's really interesting, because when we start to talk about the power of the mentor and the role that they play and the influence, right, in creating a safe space or not, the role for a mentor sometimes is so important to say, if you don't know, I don't know that. That is not my experience, right? That was not my generation. That is not my skill set in my career. But how can you leverage your network as a mentor then to connect a mentee to somebody else that you might know, bridge that connection? And then it leads into the bit of that sponsorship, right? How can you open another door and advance those connections for individuals? Gabby or Tyler, do you want to share a little bit more on that question? And then I want to jump to another question in the QA.
I definitely want to echo what Colin and Joel said about self-awareness. And I think it's totally okay to draw the line and say to my mentee, this is as far as I can go. And that's fine. Just be clear about that. Joel highlighted earlier that what is it that the mentee wants to learn? Is it more like hard skills, or do you really, are you looking for a connection that can help you to better understand your lived experience? And if you don't share that lived experience, maybe you just you're going to decide not to be a mentor. You just said it, Tracy. Then you just build the bridge so that mentee can look for someone else. I love that what Colin highlighted. And yeah, my point here is just be clear about what you can offer and what you cannot offer. And if you do that, you can really be a mentor, to Colin's point earlier, at any point of your career. Everyone, my perspective is everyone has something to share. Is it just doing the matching and understanding what is it that you can share and who wants to get that offer?
Thanks, Gabby. Yeah, I completely agree. Right, there's a role sometimes for when individuals get asked to be a mentor, to support somebody else, that they can get really excited and overcommit. And I think that authenticity, that realistic place about where the skill set is, what you can commit to, is just so important. Because if you overcommit, right, then there's disappointment, and some of those relationships may not be able to move forward in the way that they could without having those realistic conversations. So thank you for sharing that. Tyler, I'm going to hand it to you.
Yeah, I want to get to other questions, but like I would just be remiss not to add like the sort of bottom up type of mentorship that I really want to add to the conversation. Like really around, for me, I truly believe that our most radical, innovative, forward pushing ideas will come from queer and trans youth. And I firmly believe that. So when I think about mentorship, I think that a lot of the times I hear it framed, not so much today, but maybe outside of this call, is very much in terms of what can the mentor give to the mentee. And I think it's important that I have mentors that are much younger than me. You know, did my graduate studies in public policy, like I lead a national nonprofit, but at the end of the day, like I was an activist first and I'll be an activist last. And in those activist spaces, the ideas always come from youth. So in terms of my mentorship, I have different, I guess, umbrellas of mentors as well that are a little bit different than the ones we've noted, but one of those is definitely youth mentors. What am I learning from the ways that I'm approaching the work? What am I hearing about the impacts of how we approach the work and how they actually translate to change for grassroots organizations, unincorporated organizations? So the question was really like, where do you need to be in your career, or what do you need to have done to be a mentor? And I think that you really just need to be in a different social location than the person that you're mentoring. That way you're bringing in like a completely different iteration of life, a completely different iteration of a lived experience, to sort of like deepen what the person, how the person you're mentoring is approaching certain situations. So yeah, the highlight there just really being that mentees can be like, I have youth mentors, people that I learn, arguably more than anyone else. I learn things from the young people. So I'd add that in.
I love that multi-dimensional look at mentoring, because again, we fall victim sometimes to going into, they need to have more experience, they need to be older than us. And that experience of lived experience and learning that lived experience is just so important, because those journeys and that lived experience, we all can benefit from. And certainly when we start to look at workplaces and future of work, young leaders today, and certainly young leaders that are from the community, have a different lived experience than each of us. And we're all a little bit older. So I'm going to say we're all a little bit older and longer in the tooth, but their lived experience is so very different. And I know you highlighted that, Colin, but that reverse mentorship, sometimes people call that, but really hearing, how do we equip workplace settings to not only be attractive to those young leaders coming as our future leaders, and how do we make that attractive? Because they are being more selective in workplaces and wanting to really understand the value sets around how are these workplaces being open? How are they looking at the value sets and what they stand for, right? And part of that is that mentoring mindset in those communities. We have another question in the Q&A that I want to bring forward. And it actually is a question around any advice that you would give to someone who is looking for a mentor and isn't able to network in person. And so what are some opportunities? How can individuals seeking out mentorship opportunities do that if in person isn't available? Gabby, I'm going to hand it to you, given your work setting and your experience and your environment.
Great question, and very appropriate given the times that we're living. I feel that for some folks in our community, and also if we think of intersectionality, those who are neurodivergent, it can actually be easier to network virtually than in person. Many people who are introverts as well feel that, but if you're not, if you get energized by connecting with people face to face, yes, you have to adjust yourself. I think it takes time, but it is totally possible. I find personally hard to network virtually if it's an event, and you know how they're using those tools that you break into rooms and you have to virtually connect with a lot of people. But if it's a one-on-one setting, I find personally that it's even easier. I think it's finding what methods you want to apply. I don't have like a solution to give to the person who asked, but from my experience is how do you want to network with that person? What sort of events you want to attend? There are many tools out there, and many organizations have adjusted how they facilitate connections between people. And if you're in doubt how to network, leverage your mentors and ask them, how are you connecting with others virtually? Just come from that place of curiosity and find out how others are doing, if you're not too sure how to make those connections effectively.
Thanks, Gabby. Anyone else on the panel can offer some advice, some opportunities, and some insights?
Well, I know that Pride of Work Canada has 2 virtual networking programs. We've got Rendezvous and Matrices, and those are both free and they're virtual, so folks can sign up for those on our website. And the best advice that I ever got from one of my mentors about finding people to help you in your career is that nobody ever walked away from a conversation saying, wow, that person let me talk about myself way too much. People love talking about themselves and people love compliments. So if you think somebody is cool and you think that somebody could really help you in your career, I just put my LinkedIn in the chat. If people want suggestions for people they could reach out to them and tell them why you think they're great, because that's a really good way of opening up a conversation, making somebody feel good about themselves, making somebody, get a good impression of you. And then after you've made them feel really great about themselves, ask them for some help because you've got them on the line. So that was the best advice a mentor ever gave me. But I don't know if anybody else on the panel has suggestions for more innovative ways of making connections in today's world.
I would only add, and quite briefly, be bold and audacious. If there is something that you want, go for it. And if you don't have, I think Colin also touched on it before, if you don't have that skill set, and Gabby talked about it as well, what is that one need that you are trying to fill? Put it out there to your network of friends. Start small. And if not, that's why we have LinkedIn. Reach out. And what's the worst someone's going to say? No. Beyond that, there's no loss. So I would definitely say be bold and audacious, and it will reap its rewards.
Thank you.
I love the be bold and audacious. That will definitely get you places, and get you, the level of respect needed from between like a mentor-mentee relationship. That I like that framing. Definitely, just quickly in relation to the question on mentorship in a virtual space. The Enchanté's mentorship program is in a virtual space. We connect queer and trans leaders with queer and trans mentees. So there's that kind of identity relationship definitely with this program. It's done in an innovative way where we're trying to use different softwares. So Zoom, in addition to softwares like Gather, to sort of break the ice and try to, I think we're all finding our footing in this virtual space we're in at this point in the pandemic. So yeah, definitely reach out to Enchanté if you'd like to participate in the program, and definitely look into the wonderful resources in the chat around Pride at Work. But yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Thanks,
Tracy, can
Tyler.
I add one thing?
Absolutely.
Because I was just remembering my first days in Canada, and one thing that worked for me was which places I feel more comfortable networking, and obviously with my peers. So I started going to a bunch of queer events. And then as an introvert, for me, it always works like small settings rather than speaking with, like if I'm in a circle with 10 people, I'll likely be quiet. If I'm with 2 people, it's a group of 3, I'll likely be quite talkative. So I think start small, whatever small means to you, and start in the spaces that you feel more comfortable, and then just keep expanding. I find that that's a strategy that tends to work. And then you can expose yourself more to places that you're not too familiar, and you don't know too many people. because then by then you would have tested before your strategy. So it's a little bit of fake until you make it. But yeah, start small and then just keep expanding.
Yeah, Gabby, thank you for that. I think it's about recognizing who you are, that ground zero question of where you want to go, what you're interested in, but knowing yourself, right? Doing some self-reflection. What are you comfortable in? And start there. And then your horizons will start to expand. Okay, we are short on time, but I want to go to each of our panelists. What is one thing that you hope attendees take away about effective mentorship from today's session? And Joelle, I'm going to start with you. Then we'll go to Gabby, Tyler, and we'll end with you, Colin.
Hold space and ask your questions with curiosity and make sure that it is their agenda, not your own. That would be my top one.
Thank you. Gabby.
Gosh, this is hard because we talked about so many important things, but I'll highlight my biggest takeaways is if you are already in a place that you can use your privilege to elevate others, do that. Identify the potential of others as well. Identify your potential. Joelle, just call it out. Come from a place of curiosity. Create spaces for others to flourish. And then if you're in doubt, if you have something to offer, you do. I hope that you got this out of all of us. Everyone has something to offer. And I think putting yourself in a position of a mentor will also teach you so much. And you're likely going to be a better mentee if you keep giving back to others in whatever way you can.
Thanks, Gabby. Tyler.
Yeah, I would say, and I'm pretty sure I remember who said the quote, but it was, if you treat someone like who they could be, they'll become who they should be. And that always really sits really well with me. So just the main takeaway that I'd like to leave folks with is make sure that your mentor is treating you exactly like they think you could be great, because you should. Yeah.
Thank you. And Colin, can you close us out?
No matter who you are, if you are somebody who wants a mentor or you want to mentor somebody, I guarantee you are capable of so much more than you think that you are. And you just have to find the right person to show that to you. So go out there and do it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to this panel. It was an honor to engage in these conversations. I learned so much from each of you. I wish we had another half an hour to dive into some really deep conversations further. But I'm really hoping that this will spark further conversations, inspire individuals to step up into the mentoring space, and that our participants are encouraged to seek out mentoring in all forms, right? That informal piece, formal mentoring programs that we spoke about today. So thank you. Thank you to our panelists for sharing your insight, your knowledge, and your experience. Jade, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you to all of our panelists. I know that I learned quite a bit watching, and I can see folks in the chat feel the same way. You know, Colin, talking about question zero, what we're trying to accomplish, I think is such an important piece for folks to take away and to come from. You know, Joelle, you talked about the importance of using your privilege to, you know, create mentorship programs, and that, you know, different mentors bring different pieces to the table, which I think is so important. Gabby, you talked about, you know, mentors coming from a place of curiosity, which I loved. You know, really that curiosity is such a powerful thing. And I think that's something that a lot of people talked about is this importance of, you know, holding space, making sure that it was not your agenda, but it's the mentee's agenda, and maybe helping guide them in that agenda if they're not sure as well, though. You know, Tyler, you had so many quotable pieces today, but two of the quotes that I came out with was, you know, mentorship is a connection, it's a relationship. which I think is so very real. It's those moments of connection and depth that you may not have in other types of professional relationships, that really comes out. And the one that really also stood out for me is that mentorship is a space to be vulnerable. And that I think is such a beautiful thing. I think creating that space for vulnerability is that space where we can grow, right? Is that space where we can support each other, keep going and move forward. And Tracy, you did such an amazing job moderating this panel. I'm so grateful that you were part of the discussion today. And really kind of some of the things that you mentioned was how mentorship and being a mentor is an honored and an earned title. It's something that you earn over time. And I know that there are folks who I have considered mentors, who, when they're told that, they might not know that relationship is as important as it is, because sometimes it's those informal mentorship relationships that are just as important as those formal ones, though we certainly need to see those formal ones as well. And really, one of the other pieces that I took away from what you said was you need to show courage in doing this work. And, I think that goes to what Tyler was talking about in terms of vulnerability, having that courage and showing that courage and recognizing, as Gabby said, if you're in doubt, you have something to offer, you do. So I hope everybody comes out of this with potential opportunities. So we've put up on the screen some of our resources for you, including Pride at Work Canada's resources, as well as some of the mentorship opportunities that were talked about. So check out Mentor Canada. Tracy and her team are doing really great work over there. Check out the Enchanté Network's mentorship program. Tyler and his team is doing great work over there. As mentioned, Colin is mentor with Jumpstart Refugee Talent, so check out their program. Edie has been a presenter of ours as well on a different panel. They do really great work. Also, one of our community partners, the Victoria Pride Society, for those who are out that way. On Coast Salish territory, their mentorship program is really great. They have a local engagement. And also, we aren't associated with them, but I wanted to give a shout out to the Canadian Association of Emergency Physicians, who have launched a 2S LGBTQIA+ mentorship program within their industry. That could be an example for other industries moving forward. So thank you, Colin, Gabby, Tyler, Joelle, Tracy, and everybody who came today. Also a shout out to Connor, who is doing the tech on the background, and also did some of the background support on this event. Luis, who's actively in our chat, and all of you. So keep in mind coming to future events that we have coming up. So we have a number of events coming through May, including a member workshop, More Than Rainbow, Cultivating 2S LGBTQIA+ Belonging at Work, which includes the SRDC research that I mentioned at the top of the hour. We also have two really exciting webinars coming up for you. And so these are for member organizations, being Towards Braiding, Two-Spirit and Indigenous Inclusion in the Workplace with Elwood Jimmy, as well as a French webinar, 2S LGBTQIA+ Harassment in the Workplace with Olivia Baker. So really excited to get to attend these as well myself, and check out our upcoming listing of events. We will be posting our Pride events soon. Sorry, Luis. Luis is our communications coordinator, that it's been delayed. But it will be coming soon, and the theme is resurgence. So we're very excited to be coming back in person, as well as continuing our great virtual programming. And so check out some of the research that we've been involved in, some of the reports, and thank you everybody who joined us today.